Part 4. Parallelism. Let us follow out our principle that the structure of a sentence depends on the nature of the thought to be expressed, and observe how it applies to one or two other important matters of sentence construction. We have seen that when any parts of our sentence thought are different in rank, when some are chief and others are subordinate, we must, in order to be strictly truthful, express this logical difference through a structural difference. It naturally follows that when any parts of our sentence thought are of the same rank, are logically coordinate, we must express this logical sameness through a structural sameness. For example, let us suppose that we desire to express a complete thought composed of two parts logically coordinate. We shall then write a compound sentence containing two clauses. The chairman was Mr. Simpson, and the secretary was Mr. Holt. If our thought had three parts, we shall write, I came, I saw, I conquered. In these cases, subordination would positively distort the thought. It would not be quite the truth to say, having come, I saw, I conquered. Or, the chairman was Mr. Simpson, the secretary being Mr. Holt. If we now suppose that we desire to express a complete thought composed of three constituent thoughts, one main thought and two subordinate thoughts, we shall of course put the main thought into the principal clause and the subordinate thoughts into the parallel subordinate clauses. If the rain stops, and if the roads are good enough, the inspector will drive on to Stockton in the morning. The first two thoughts have been expressed in the form of conditional clauses introduced by if, but they are related to the third and main thought in precisely the same way. The inspector's driving on to Stockton is dependent on the two contingencies. Since the subordinate ideas are parallel, they are put into parallel constructions. It would not do to say, should the rain stop and if the roads are good enough, the inspector will drive on to Stockton in the morning. Should is a verb, whereas if is a conjunction. There can be no parallelism until we change our verb and conjunction to either two verbs or two conjunctions. Two practical suggestions, if borne in mind, will help in the detection and correction of faulty parallelism. First, remember that the sign of parallelism is grammatical. We should have two or more participles, two infinitives, two pronouns, two prepositions, etc. If the principle of parallelism gives us trouble, we may be reasonably certain that the cause of the trouble is our own imperfect acquaintance with grammatical forms. In this event, the obvious remedy is to go to our grammar and to study carefully, among other things, the parts of speech. Before we can master parallel construction, we must be able to state the part of speech of every word in any sentence. Secondly, fix your attention on the first word or phrase. This is always made the sign of parallelism. Provided that we have two clauses introduced by if, or two clauses introduced by should, we may be sure that they are parallel even if the later parts of the clauses differ. For example, in the sentence already given, if the rain stops, and if the roads are good enough, the inspector will drive on to Stockton in the morning. The phrase good enough follows the are of the second clause, whereas the verb stops of the first clause stands alone. And yet, the two clauses are regarded as parallel in construction, just as two lines may be parallel without being the same length. In many instances of parallelism, the similarity in grammatical forms affects only the first word or two, as in this sentence. He said that it ought not to be done, and that he, for his part, had no interest in it. Sometimes, however, the two constructions are parallel throughout, as in this sentence from an essay of Arnold's. To know Italian belles lettres is not to know Italy, and to know English belles lettres is not to know England. Here the two members, being equivalent, form a balanced as well as parallel construction. The principle of balance is simply an extension or intensification of the principle of parallelism. Neither parallelism nor balance is restricted to a single sentence either. Indeed, may affect any number of successive sentences. Here is a familiar illustration from Julius Caesar. Who is here so base that would be a bondman? If any speak, for him I have offended. Who is here so rude that would not be Roman? If any speak, for him I have offended. Who is here so vile that will not love his country? If any speak, for he I have offended. One of the most useful types of balance construction is that in which the balance rests on correlative conjunctions. Conjunctions used in pairs to connect sentence elements of equal rank. For example, sincerity is of the utmost importance, not only in the choice of a subject, but also in the execution of every detail. Both the choice of subject and the execution of every detail should be entirely sincere. Note that the grammatical forms following the correlative in these two sentences are the same, not only in, but also in, or both the choice, and the expression. To the foregoing discussion of the principle of parallelism, a word of warning must be added. After we have become familiar with the parallel construction and have observed how often the use of it immediately clarifies a murky thought, we may be inclined to resort to it on occasions when the thought does not lend itself into this mode of expression. Thus, the following sentence. When he reached the city, and when we remember how unaccustomed he was to its noise and turmoil, he naturally began to question his decision. We have written a construction which is undoubtedly parallel, but which has no right to be. The two thoughts expressed in the two when clauses are not parallel thoughts. Our difficulty is not that we have written faulty parallel construction, one in which the constructions fail to mirror the parallelism of the thought, but that we have written a false parallel construction, one in which the thought does not justify the parallelism in the construction. So long as we remember the possibility of committing this blunder, we may employ parallelism as freely as we like. Again, there are exercises in this book, and I will try to find a link to them in case you wish to do them yourself. Thank you for listening.